This is episode 34 of the Women in Depth podcast. The information found in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. Today's topic is one that I know will resonate with many listeners, and it has to do with dating and relationships. As a therapist, I have to say that questions around dating and relationship are some of the most common ones that come up in my work with clients. And relationships are a big deal. They matter. And most of us want to do relationships better. And so today, Dr. Sharon Cohen is going to help us out with that. She's going to share some of the brain science behind dating, which I found completely fascinating, and also dating and relationship do's and don'ts, red flags, and common myths and misconceptions about dating and relationship. I think that today's episode will bring you some clarity and insights that will be helpful for you as you move forward in navigating your relationships. Hi, and welcome back to the podcast. Today, our guest is Dr. Sharon Cohen. She's a relationship and love consultant in Newport Beach, California. She specializes in healthy communication strategies and the social dynamics of men and women. Her primary mission is to help women gain the skills to attract and keep long-lasting love. Dr. Sharon provides inspiration and help for women who are dating, having growing pains in a relationship, going through a breakup, seeking to recover and move on, and who are going through a dry spell. She currently sees clients in her office, on walk and talks outside of the office, and via video calls for people who aren't in the local area. Hi, Dr. Sharon, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Lourdes. It's great to talk to you.
Thank you so much for doing this again. We won't tell the audience how many times we've done this, but we'll say it's more than once.
Oh my gosh, I'm just so happy to be on the call with you.
Well, thank you for sharing your time again with me. Just to start off, could you share a little bit more about how you were drawn into this work of love, relationship consulting with women?
Absolutely. You know what? I think most of us who get into this work have our own journey of dealing with some sort of pain in our life that brings us to our work. And so I had my own path that I walked of going through relationships and having my own dry spell, my own time of loneliness, and then ended up meeting my husband. I'm a later bride, and have the joy of being in a very loving and happy relationship now with my husband of just over a year now. And so over that time, I had a mentor who showed me the way, and I just want to sort of return that favor and pass it on to other women.
You know, two things struck me as you were sharing, a little this information about you, and that is how being a later bride, and what I see, with a lot of women in my practice and, just friends is a concern among them because it's appearing that they will be later brides. And I feel like that's actually, part of the anxiety that goes into this dating process.
Oh my goodness. There's a couple of different times I think we feel anxiety around dating, and there's a societal sort of oppression. I think that's lifting a little bit, but I think there's a societal pressure to get married at a certain point in your 20s and then again in your 30s. And then when you hit your 40s, it's like, I think there was at one point an article that I think it was Time Magazine, that said you have a greater chance of getting struck by lightning than you do of getting married. And that caused great furor in the community, and a huge amount of anxiety. So I think that's changed a lot. I do believe that there are a lot of people that are getting married at a later age, because we have much more opportunity now, and a lot of women are making a choice, maybe not even to get married. I think that since we do have more opportunity with work and career, a lot of women are putting off getting married, but also that we have the choice to find our husband at a later time.
I love that you're sharing this, because I feel that it's important to normalize this experience, because so many women are going through it. And it's really about expanding our ideas and definitions about what a marriage should look like, what time it should happen, and what a healthy, normal woman's relationship development looks like. It's just, I think it's just really, like I said, it's expanding and allowing different experiences and possibilities.
Absolutely. And the thing is it doesn't mean that you don't go through some of the pain of having to grieve certain things. I definitely grieved the loss of the reality that I wasn't going to have kids. Some women make the decision to have a kid on their own. But for me, I had decided that I didn't want to just have a child. I wanted to have a family. And so around 37, 38, my doctor said to me that it was time. It was time for me to have a kid if I was going to ever do that. And I really went through about a 4 or 5 month grieving period where I thought about freezing eggs and whatnot, and decided that just wasn't going to be the right thing for me to do. But so I went through that process, and even still, I have twinges of sadness about not having had children, but they're momentary. And I just look at that as sort of like give it a sort of a picture, like one spice jar on the spice rack of life. That is one thing, but there's all these other things that I had and got to experience because of the way that my life turned out. I had a lot of freedom. I had a lot of other experiences because I didn't get married until later.
Yeah, I love how you described that. I spoke with Dr. Kara Barker last week, and she used the phrase, one of the difficult things we go through is letting go of dreams that we desire and making the choice of letting go of the children of the heart. Not all children are what we think of with children, a child, a baby, and that some of these children are other things. For women who do have children, they have often had to let go of other children of the heart.
Right.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's beautiful. Yeah, I think, and maybe there's some reason that I have no idea. That's, it just wasn't part of my life plan to have a child. And I don't necessarily have, the bigger picture of what that was. I don't think we always know.
Yeah.
we have to let go of dreams that don't come to fruition, and we don't know why. I think actually sometimes that's with relationships as well. We sometimes when we break up with someone, we have to let go of the dream that we had about that relationship. Sometimes it's not even letting go of the person that's so difficult. It's letting go of the dream that you thought you had.
You shared also, when you were expanding on the introduction, about being mentored in this process regarding love and relationships. And that struck me as well. I feel like for men and women in general, there's a shortage or a lack of mentorship in all areas. And it is so powerful when you find someone who can guide you and walk beside you during difficult transitions and learning curves. So could you speak on that a little bit more?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I always wanted a mentor. It's such a funny thing that I literally had sort of always craved a mentor in my life, and just sort of felt that it was something I wanted and lacked. And I lived in Texas for 10 years, and then I moved back to California, and I met a woman, Dr. Pat Allen, and I went to one of her seminars. She runs weekly seminars here, and went to one of her seminars, and then she has an institute, the One Institute, and went to kind of school there, and was able to learn with her and from her. And we just had a really special relationship. And I learned so much from her, and she was able to bring things out of me that just no one had ever before. And I just will be forever grateful to her for that relationship.
That's powerful. I just think that that's such a gift that you got to experience that. And I love that that's in a way how you see your work with women, with the clients that you support as, mentoring them through this challenge of, relationship and searching for something, for love, for connection.
Yeah, because I really believe that without her help, that I don't think that I would have gotten to the place where I am now. I think that she really guided me to understanding where my weak spots were, places where I'd been in therapy a number of times before and just hadn't gotten the information that she was able to give me and had not received some of the awarenesses and light bulb aha moments that she was able to provide me. And so I believe that those were the things that were able to turn the corner for me and give me just the kick in the butt that I needed to make the changes that I didn't have prior to our relationship.
So Sharon, one of the things that grabbed my attention about the work that you do and in our conversations prior to this is the brain science. I think this stuff is so important, so fascinating. I don't know why it's not plastered all over all the women's magazines that are out there. So could you begin to share, some of the brain science stuff that it would be really helpful for us to be aware of as we kind of jump into this dating scene?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that's really important to understand is that when we first meet someone, there's different phases of like neurochemical interactions that are going on in our body and that hit our brain. That really affects how we act and react. And so so like on first blush, when we first meet someone, there's a rush of dopamine and norepinephrine and something called phenylethylamine. It's called PEA, and that's how I know it. The other words are harder for me to say, obviously. But then there's also a surge of adrenaline and testosterone. That's what makes your heart race, and you get sweaty palms, and it just all of that together, it's the thing that makes you just get really excited when you see that person, and it's what can make you act sort of out of body, and it makes you not necessarily think straight. And actually, one thing that's funny, and I think women should know, is that when a guy sees a pretty woman and he has this rush of all these chemicals, he can't really think straight. And so oftentimes on a first date, a guy can't talk very well. And so he sort of is duh. And a woman will think, well, gosh, he wasn't very interesting. And it's because he's got all these neurochemical rush going through him, and and take it as a compliment because he thinks you're beautiful.
So it's almost like if the guy is a little befuddled and kind of stumbling over his words or is awkward, that's a good sign.
It's such a good sign. It's such a good sign. He thinks you're so attractive, and he's so attracted to you. So don't take it that like he's a fumbling dork. He thinks you're beautiful.
I love that.
Yeah. And also, I think the other thing is when we fall into this romantic or obsessive love, which is different from, lust, which is just like sort of the craving of sex, that's when you feel energized and you have like these obsessive, often intrusive thoughts about the object of your attention or affection. Some research suggests that the brain chemistry of this phase is kind of similar to the manic phase of what we know as, bipolar disorder, what used to be known as manic depressive disorder. And for women, what's interesting is certain hormones for us increase while other hormones for men decrease. So for women, what increases is oxytocin, which is known as the cuddle hormone. And it's like nature's love super glue. It makes us just bond and, want to be with that person and connect. And what also increases is cortisol, which is a stress hormone. And testosterone for us increases, for women increases. So it can cause us to become more of the aggressor. But for men, what decreases, interestingly enough, is testosterone, which can cause them to become a little more passive. Now, for both men and women, serotonin decreases, which many people know is responsible for maintaining mood balance. And a deficit of serotonin leads to obsession and depression, which if you think about it, it makes sense because when we meet someone and we're kind of in that romantic phase of love, we do sort of obsess about what the other person is thinking or doing. And if we don't hear from them, we do kind of get sad and wonder what's going on. So this oxytocin, it's especially high during the first 6 months of the relationship. And so it's really a time when women have to be very careful about how they utilize the first 6 months. If we take a lot of risks, if we have prematurely bond to a man and he isn't in the same place. So because when we have intercourse with a man right off the bat and we get bonded immediately, it can take up to 2 years for us to detox off of the oxytocin.
Oh,
and a man
goodness.
Doesn't have the same effect.
2 years?
Up to 2 years.
So this is oxytocin, which you said was nature's love superglue. And
Exactly.
if I remember correctly, you had mentioned to me prior in another conversation
Right.
that is this the same chemical that is released when women are pregnant or breastfeeding?
Exactly. And so the thing is oxytocin is synergistic with estrogen. And so the only time that men really feel the same effects with oxytocin is when they're over 50 and their testosterone is decreasing. And so their estrogen is more highly expressed. So men over 50 kind of experience the same feelings with oxytocin as women under 50 who are, premenopausal. So it's why you see older men really bonding with younger women because they have that same oxytocin bond. But it's also when older men can really get taken for a ride by a younger woman who might, take a guy for his money, or he can die of what's it called? Takotsubo syndrome, which is a broken heart syndrome.
Wow.
Yeah, the older men really need to be careful.
Well, it's interesting too, as I think about, just in my interactions with men, and I'm noticing this in my clients and my older clients, there is an increasing depth of feeling and sensitivity I've noticed in my older male clients. And with women,
Absolutely.
It's almost the reverse. The
Absolutely.
older they get, there's more of, not that they're not sensitive or have any feeling, but it seems like almost like, I don't know, are they experiencing an increase? Oh, their estrogen's decreasing.
Yeah, their estrogen's decreasing and their progesterone is increasing. So they're having the opposite effect. So it's why actually older women and younger men get along really well, because older women are getting to be more productive and more, not that younger women aren't productive, but they have more of that progesterone, that's being expressed, and they have less of the effects of oxytocin. So what happens is that older men and younger women fall in love because of the oxytocin bond, but younger men and older women decide to fall in love.
Interesting. Wow. That's powerful. And just going back to what you were saying about it's wise for women to be very careful about how they utilize the first 6 months of a relationship, because of the oxytocin really kind of supergluing them to a relationship that may not actually be the best relationship for them. And then it's very difficult to extricate themselves. You said it can take up to 2 years.
Right. The thing is that oxytocin isn't only, it doesn't only, it's lactating, gestating, fornicating, but it's also, you get oxytocin in lots of ways. You get it by cuddling, you get it by holding hands, you get it by, just being close and kissing. But it really, you get the biggest surge of it, when you orgasm and and actually also it comes in through the mouth and into the nose and hits the Jacobson's organ pre-olfactory nerve. So anything like oral sex or anything like that, it also comes in that way. So I really kind of encourage my clients to get a commitment before they engage in any sort of sexual intercourse, because a man's testosterone decreases once he makes a commitment. It doesn't have to be marriage, but it has to be like a formal commitment. I encourage like a promise ring or an engagement ring, because once he makes, again, that formal commitment, his testosterone decreases, which means he's not so much in that predatory, out there looking for other women sort of place. He's sort of now in more of that nesting mode with you.
So really, like this really explains, like on a scientific level with research, why it's not wise to, get married 2 weeks after you meet someone or move in together in the first, so quickly, because all these chemicals are just swirling around and really, you don't really have clarity or correct information necessarily after this.
That's exactly it.
Right? After the sea of chemicals becomes more clear, you might be at a completely different place than when you made all these decisions.
Absolutely. You're completely unclear. Yeah, and the thing is, I wouldn't encourage anyone to make any huge decisions until you've known someone for a year, like as far as like signing any legal documents, because things, you need to go through like all the seasons of a year where things can happen, bad things can happen. You can get into, your first disagreement. You can see someone, maybe someone in your life might, unfortunately die. You think things can happen within a year that you can see how someone's going to support you or not. You can see how they deal with distress in their own life, in your life, how there's just so much that can happen in a year that you're not going to see within the first 6 months. You may feel like you really, really know someone in a month. And you may know a lot about someone in a month. You may see like, wow, I really feel like this is the right person. There's just that sense of knowing, but there's still not a complete knowing. A sociopath can really hide their bad behavior for a long time. They can fool you for a long time, but up to a year, after a year, you're going to start seeing the cracks in the mask.
So what would you say are your suggestions as far as relationship do's for women when they're beginning the dating process?
Yeah, the do's, I would say first is look at dating as practice. First of all, it really takes the pressure off. I think every date doesn't have to lead to a relationship. And so you have to just look at each one as just sort of like being a night out, just you're just going to meet this person and just find out about them. What's something interesting about them? What's something nice about them? What's some sort of, look for something just unique about them. But don't look at each date as maybe this is the guy. And just stay present in the moment, because until you find the one, this isn't the one. And then you'll be ready when you do find the one. I teach a lot of my clients communication tools. And so I tell them to, practice those communication tools on this date. And especially if it's a guy that you don't think you're that interested in, great. Then you won't be nervous practicing these communication tools with this guy. And then you'll have the communication tools down when you do meet the one, and you won't be nervous using them. But because when you're stressed, the communication tools will go out the window. So you better have them down when you're not stressed. Better practice them now when you're not stressed with this guy. So go out with this guy, with that guy. Have a good time, even if it's not the one. Just go and practice.
That's such a great idea and a wonderful way to look at dating, because I hear women who feel like, oh, I went on another date and it didn't go well, or they'll even say, it was another waste of time, and not really seeing it, like you said, as an opportunity to practice.
Well, yeah, and you're really looking to learn what is it that you don't want. You need to find out. I mean, I've heard women say, I don't want to go out again until it's the right guy. And it's like, well, how are you going to know it's the right guy unless you go and meet guys who aren't the right guy? How are you going to know what you want and don't want? You have to keep going.
That makes so much sense, because I hear a variation of that of, I just don't want to go through all of that. I don't want to have to deal with dating. And instead of, like you said, it's part of the process. You don't just find the right one.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's absolutely right.
And I think also that helps to look at it. It's not bad. You're not a failure. It's not anything negative that you are dating different guys and just basically having experiences and practicing.
Right. And that's another piece of it. It's like being open to other people and to their opinion on things. You don't always have to. I think a lot of times women, one of the mistakes they make is that they feel the need to defend themselves or their opinion. And if you just say, wow, that's interesting that you have that idea. This is my experience. You don't have to make them see it your way, because in the long run, it doesn't really matter. Just that's interesting. You see it that way. I see it this way. Wow. Okay. I just think a lot of women I meet really feel compelled to kind of almost get in a debate with men about how the man sees it this way and I see it that way. And they don't see that they're trying to control the man by explaining why I, the woman, see it this way, by kind of going over it, why, explaining why I see it this way, that's sort of a way of trying to control him.
I think that's such a powerful skill, because, once you do get into the quote right relationship, there are going to be a lot of opportunities to say, wow, that's interesting that you think of it this way and I think of it that way.
Right. It's huge. It's huge. Because I'll tell you this right now, that one of the biggest problems in relationships that I see is that the man tells me that she's trying to control me, and I feel like I'm being mothered, and the woman's saying, I don't know what he's talking about, but what it is that she's doing that. She's saying, well, I want him to do it this way, and it's really that she's telling him to think the same way as her. And he doesn't see it my way. It's like, he doesn't have to see it your way. He has every right to do it his way, to think it his way. Just like every one of us is born out of the womb with the right to be, to feel, to think, to share exactly the way we do it. And but we aren't giving that right to other people. And that's a problem, because you know what? The thing is that usually once we're born, our rights are stripped away by parents, teachers, society, religious institutions. And so once that's happened to us, we end up doing it to other people. And so one of my biggest things is to start to give that right back to my clients and help them give that right back to their partners or their dates or other people who are in their life. Like, you have the right to be who you are. And that's such an important message that I really, really promote with my clients.
I absolutely see that too with clients I work with, where the woman really feels like she's concerned, she's being helpful, she is not trying to be controlling, and is actually kind of shocked when she hears that from the man, that she's being perceived or experienced that way. So I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because that is so important.
Yeah, it's amazing, because it's being over helpful, which is absolutely seen as mothering.
So are there any other dating or relationship do's that you want to mention for women?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say one is to keep your eyes up and open, because you never know who's looking at you. And so many women, I think, are looking down at their phone or just not paying attention. They're kind of off in la la land, and they say to me that there's no one out there. No one's. I don't get asked out. And a lot of men aren't going to go up to a woman who isn't looking at them. Drunks will come up to you if you're not looking at them, but if you're not making eye contact with anybody at any time, then it's very hard to approach you. So if you have your eyes up and you're looking around and you look approachable, then it's more likely that someone's going to see that, and come up and say, hi. And you may be so surprised to find out that like guys are checking you out way more often than you think. And that will build your confidence right there.
Yeah. So when it comes to relationships, so not the dating process so much, but when a woman is now in a relationship, what are some of the things that you suggest for her to do?
When she's in a relationship, I would say, really, what's probably really important is to be respectful of a man. Don't rob him of the opportunity to help you, I think so often men are looking for ways to be helpful. And like, I'll give the silliest example. Just the other night, I was opening a jar. And so having lived alone for quite some time, what did I do? If I couldn't open a jar, I banged it on the floor, just like my mom would do when my dad wasn't around, so that I would pop the seal and then undo it. My husband is standing right there, and he looks at me and he's like, I'm a husband. I'm standing right here. I'm your husband. This is what I'm here for. And I'm like, oh, yeah, right, of course. And I handed him the jar, and he, of course, opened it for me. And I think that's just a very small, silly example. But I think there's other opportunities like that are there where we can ask our man to help us, but we're so used to doing things ourselves. If you're a mother who's been taking care of yourself and your kids for a long time, and you're not used to having a man around, you're very used to saying, no, I can do it. I can take care of it myself. But if you have a man who's either, a boyfriend or a new husband, ask for his help, even if you don't need it. Say, hey, it would really help me if you could, whatever it is, help me clean out the garage today, help me. Because the minute they stop helping you is actually the minute you should step forward and ask them for your help, because they think that you don't need them if they stop helping you. They're happy to help. They want to help, even if it's something that they don't like to do. If they know it will make you happy, they want to help you.
It's so interesting about that, Sharon, as I see with many women. And I think, this is also part of my own experience, is that women have a hard time navigating, I want to be independent and I don't want to need a man, but they don't realize that that's part of that relationship dynamic is for the men to feel that you do need him. And for women, they sometimes struggle with, I don't want to need anyone. It's kind of an interesting dynamic.
It's very interesting, because the weird thing is sometimes the minute you get mad at someone, or you're feeling that sense of like, like something's going wrong in the relationship, is the first minute that you want to pull away. But it's the time that you actually need to step into the relationship. You have to go towards the relationship, not away from the relationship. And that's hard for a lot of people to do, because you want to establish your independence, but you're in a relationship. Don't walk away from it, walk towards it.
Yeah, I love that you said that. I think I've used a variation of that where last thing you want to do is to move towards your partner. That's actually the most important and the first thing you need to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's hard, because your insides is just going, but, you have to go up to your brain and say, wait, what am I supposed to do here? What's the thing that I could do that would make this relationship better right now? And it's that, I could ask him for help. I could ask for a hug. I could, whatever it would be that would bring you two closer together. I could ask him to talk. I could ask him to go, for a walk, whatever it is.
So, Sharon, what would you say would be for you red flags in dating or relationships?
I would say probably one of the biggest things is that if he doesn't make and keep agreements. First he needs to be able to make an agreement, but then he really needs to be able to keep the agreement. I think, like, if you love yourself, you make and keep agreements that you've made with yourself. If you say, you know what, I want to eat healthy and be fit, then you make that agreement with yourself. You keep that agreement with yourself. And it's the same with, someone else. It's a great way to evaluate how highly you value yourself and how highly someone else values you. And I would also say, this is a really important one. If you find yourself spending more time trying to figure out what he's thinking and trying to unravel his mind and what he's doing, rather than developing a real relationship based on intimacy and authentic communication, then I would say that is probably a very big red flag.
I agree with you on that. That is something that I think a lot of women do. They spend so much time trying to figure out the relationship and what to do differently and what's going on with him, and not realizing that is just a sign that this is not probably where you should be putting all this energy.
Right. There's something going on. He's either being hinky, or he's not a good communicator, or, there's just something very, very wrong when you're spending all your time trying to sleuth the whole thing out.
So if you were to share some of the, what are some of the, the myths that people believe or the misperceptions they have about relationships?
I would say, this is probably going to get me in trouble with some people, but that equality in a relationship is not good. That you're looking for equitability. Equitability is what you're looking for. That romance disappears if you go Dutch each and every time you go out. Or if you pay one time and then he pays the next time, and you pay and then he pays. If you're going back and forth every single time, there's no sense that one person is chasing and then the other person is being chased. You need that sort of, dynamic to make things more exciting. And studies on dopamine, adrenaline, and oxytocin all bear this out. You don't want to just be buddies and roommates. You want to have that sense of, sexual polarity. So that's one myth that I would say, or misconception, or just maybe even idea. I know that there's a lot of people out there that say, it's all about equality, but I would say equitability is the word that I would use.
That makes sense, because I can see that, when you're kind of doing that tit for tat, like, well, okay, I paid this time, it's your turn to pay, or really trying to be equal, it's not sexy.
It's not sexy.
It's not sexy.
It's not sexy at all. Ugh, not at all. And then I kind of hit on this a little bit earlier, but kind of to flesh it out a little bit, that taking care of and giving and nurturing, the misconception that those are all feminine traits, but they're actually masculine. And because they're mothering, which again, that sounds like it's a feminine thing. But if you think about what mothering is the mother taking care of like an innocent, baby who is, if we want to talk about yin and yang energy, the yang energy is the one that's taking care of the yin energy. The yin is passive, which is the baby. The yang is the active masculine energy, which is the mom. And so problems really occur in couples when they have their first baby. And the woman turns from her, feminine ways to suddenly cutting, the husband's meat and telling him to grab his coat because it's going to be cold outside. Well, you know what? He's a full grown-ass man who's already has a mother. Yeah. And he doesn't want another one. So, this over-giving looks like loving and caring, but in reality, a woman who's doing that, who's over-giving, is really, without maybe necessarily consciously doing this, but she's trying to control everyone around her. And it's another thing that's not sexy, and it destroys kind of. It's another thing that just kind of destroys a relationship. It erodes the relationship.
Right. So like when women think that they're being helpful by helping him, with his, his laundry, doing his emails, or just taking care of things that he really can do for himself, you're stepping into more of a maternal role with him.
Right. I mean, it's one thing if he asks you to do it, then he's asking for your help and support, then that's one thing. But it's another thing if you just start, well, like giving him advice on his work. And let me tell you, women do this all the time.
Yeah, they
They'll,
do.
oh, have you thought of doing it this way? When he gets off of a phone call, you know what? You seemed like you were a little bit rough with that guy. And it's like, what? You don't know my work. I do this 80 hours a week. It's just not good for the relationship when women do that. Yeah, and there's one other thing I would say is that there's a misconception that men lie, that they say things on dates and they don't follow through, and that's because they're lying. When in the reality, what they do, I think, is that men try things on dates. They'll say, you know what, it'd be really fun if you met my parents. But then they don't follow through with that. And the reason they don't follow through is because they're just trying it on, seeing how it feels. Then they go home and then they think about it. And then they think, well, you know what, maybe it's too soon for her to meet my parents. Well, they don't come back and say to you, you know what, I've decided it's too soon for you to meet my parents. They just let it go. So don't believe what a man says on a date until he's, like bought the tickets or set a date or, scheduled it. Just hear what he says and let it roll off your back. And I'm telling you, when you really buy into this, when you really believe what I'm telling you, then a lot of your suffering over why isn't he following through will go away, and you'll just really enjoy your dates so much more and your relationship so much more because you'll just let these things, slide by.
You know what? I had never heard it that way, the way you described it. But I have to say that in my experience, I can totally see that that's true.
Yeah.
I remember, when dating my husband, he would drop these little nuggets, like you're saying.
Right.
And you just kind of go, oh, okay. And just kind of let it be and just continue on the relationship. And he actually commented to me a few times and, throughout the process that really meant a lot to him, that he would share these things, which were, I think inside I was going, oh my goodness, oh my gosh, that's so exciting. But just kind of had to let it float there,
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Just out there floating like a big old matzo ball. And you're like, what is that? Why isn't he doing anything about it?
Yeah. So are there any other misconceptions that you wanted to share?
No, I mean, those are probably the main ones.
And I wanted to just throw one piece in that I see, and I wanted to get your thoughts on it. I think a lot of times women in relationship think something's wrong when it's just normal relating, and they forget, or maybe they don't know that, it's not just because you're having a challenge or you're going through a rough spot doesn't mean the relationship is not going well. Like it's almost as if we have this expectation that if we're dealing with problems, things aren't going well.
Right. And really, like if you don't have any problems, then that's a problem, because that means that you're actually not dealing with real life. I had a client who said, well, in the first 4 years of our marriage, we never had a fight. And, now, of course, they're divorced. And I'm like, well, that means you never were being real and honest with each other, because it's not realistic. I mean, there had to have been things that you weren't happy with, or he wasn't happy with, and you just weren't bringing them up.
Right, right.
I mean, you weren't having actual real conversations.
So not really sharing the things that bother you. They kind of go underground and they build up, and then later on they become an issue.
Right. And absolutely. And one of the things I absolutely say is that you've got to deal with these little issues, tiny issues along the way. Be vulnerable in small doses, because if you aren't, then what's going to happen is at some point you're going to have some huge eruption, and it's going to seem like it's coming out of nowhere. So if you do these little small doses of being vulnerable along the way, especially in the early part of the relationship, what you're doing is you're calibrating the relationship so that you won't have to do this for the entirety of your relationship. But in order to understand that you both come from totally different, taken for granted realities, and until you understand their point of view and they understand your point of view, small things you don't know what each other's small things are. One of my clients had a thing of like, well, I don't like it. He goes out and waits for me in the car, and it stresses me out because I'm in the house now suddenly running around and feeling anxious because my dad used to do that. He'd wait in the car and then, and the family would be inside and we'd be running around. And so, I said, well, you have to say something to him. And so I think the second or third time he did it, she finally said something. And so he was initially kind of I think if I remember correctly, he got quiet about it, and then they had a discussion about it. And, it ended up being a good talk ultimately because it brought out that he felt flooded with emotions about it initially, but ultimately was able to understand what it did for her, and they were able to work it out. And now he walks her out to the car every time.
So we just spoke a little bit about the misperception that challenge or conflict or struggle in a relationship means it's not going well. And actually, that's a normal and necessary part of the relationship. To go to the other end of that, where maybe the relationship is clearly not going well, what are some of the signs that you would say are indicators that this is a relationship to let go of?
Yeah, you know what? I would say probably one of the biggest ones is that the person just isn't making and keeping their commitments. That, once they've started to not keep their agreements, they're showing you that you're not a priority. And if they do this in the beginning when you start to date, like say the first time they do it, it's like, well, no one's perfect. And then the second time they do it, it could maybe sort of be a yellow flag. But the third time, it's like, time to get out, especially if they do these in a relatively short succession. Because if they're not valuing you, then that's one really quick way of showing you that. And then the other thing about showing you that it's time to leave, it's when you feel just apathetic and empathetic about them. You're just sort of over it. You wish them well, but you also just sort of see them as being, that poor guy. Like I just wish him well. I hope he does well in his life, but I'm just done. I'm a big fan of staying in the relationship as long as there's charge there, as long as you still have emotional energy there, because I think you're going to learn a lesson. But as long as there's no like abuse or, no one's being hurt. But once you're done and there's just that apathy there, then it's time to go.
What are your thoughts on women who continue to stay in relationships where they are clearly unhappy and they are aware on one level that this relationship's not going well and I need to take steps to exit, but yet they stay? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think they need to look at, what are their reasons for staying? It's like, are they staying because they have phenomenal sex and they're hooked on the oxytocin and, they just don't want to break that bond? Because I've had clients who are in my office and they're fighting all the time. And it's like, well, how's the sex? And it's like, oh, well, that's great. So okay, so that's why you're staying. And is it worth it? Is that worth it for you? I mean, because if that's worth it, then that's why they're staying. The question to ask, and this is one that my mentor would say, is that person 51% valuable? Because it's like, what is that 1% that makes you stay on the bad days?
That's a great question.
Yeah, because you have to know what is that thing, that 1% that makes you stay when it's not going well. And if you can't find that extra 1%, if it dips down to 49%, then you really have to think, what am I doing here? And so that's the point where you say, I got to look at why am I here?
So for our listeners who are wondering, because we've talked a lot about concerns, red flags, myths, things to do and not do, if you were able to kind of summarize it into what are the things that women in healthy relationships do, what do they do, or what do they do differently? What would you say those things are?
I would say I'd say probably one of the biggest things is they communicate their feelings without erupting all over the other person, which is a huge part of where I help my clients, because I think it's really important for women to be in touch with their feelings, and that's massive. A lot of women, they're walking around today with their head just serving as a container for their brain, and their head is not connected at all with their body. So getting that their head and their brain connected with their body is important so that they can be in touch with their feelings. And then once they can communicate their feelings without just an overload of emotions, just being able to say them so that the man doesn't feel that the woman can't handle her feelings. The man doesn't think that she can't handle her feelings. When that happens, then an actual healthy conversation can happen where he isn't scared of her feelings. Once the man is scared of her feelings, he gets flooded with all those neurochemicals, and he shuts down. And so no good communication can happen at that point.
So it's almost like the woman has to be able to express her feelings and be connected to her feelings, but not be overwhelmed by them.
Absolutely. And because the thing is that the woman's emotions can't run the relationship. They're important to the relationship and they need to be expressed, but they can't run the relationship. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
So, and is there anything else that you would say that a healthy woman does in relationship?
Absolutely. They don't nag, and they mention how something they don't like feels for them, and they get his thoughts on that, but they don't like continually say the same thing over and over again. They say, you know what? Hey, you have every right to want to go out with your guys once a week. However, I don't like how that makes me feel. I feel left alone when you do that. What do you think about maybe making that once a month and, see what he says? And then if he says, you know what, I get it that you feel left alone. However, that's something I've been doing for 20 years before I ever met you, and it's tradition and it's not something I really want to change. Maybe I'd go down to twice a month. Can we negotiate that? And so, but you don't then once you've negotiated it, say, God, you know what? I still feel so left alone. I still feel so left alone. I still feel so left alone. You just don't nag about it. You accept or reject, but you don't tolerate. You just either say, okay, you know what? We've made an agreement. I'm going to accept that agreement and not continue to harp on it. I'm not going to continue to harp on this. I'm going to just accept it. And you don't tolerate. Tolerate is half accepting or half rejecting. And so when you do that, that's called ruminating, which is going back and forth between feeling and thinking and feeling and thinking and feeling and thinking. And that creates cortisol in your system, which is the stress hormone, like I talked about before, which creates belly fat and can lower your immune system and also can lead to an early death. So you don't want to create cortisol in your system.
So because I think that what you just said is really, really important and fascinating. So it's almost as if if there's something that you're not happy with in your relationship with your significant other, for the woman, the responsibility is on her to present that in a way where she shares her feelings but is not overwhelmed by them. And then once she shares this with him, participating in a dialogue about how to resolve it, some negotiation. And once they've reached an agreement or a compromise, then leaving it at that. And if she still has any additional feelings around that, it's almost as if that's up to her now to kind of work through.
Yeah, because you get to decide to accept or reject him as your man. If you're accepting him, then you have to stop nagging him about something that you aren't going to change. Because think how hard it is to change something you don't like about yourself, right? And so it's hard. It's hard to change, hey, I want to lose this amount of weight, or I want to stop, smoking, or I want to, it's hard to change something that you don't like about yourself. Now try and change a behavior in someone else. If they've decided that this is what they're going to do and you're going to accept, well, you know what, I'm not going to divorce him over this. right? So I'm either going to accept this behavior or reject it. And if you decide you're going to accept it, then it's no good to keep nagging him over it.
Because if you are, you haven't really accepted it.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I see that a lot. I see that a lot with clients who are resentful and angry at their significant others for certain things or changes that aren't happening or aren't happening to the degree that they'd like. But, one of the things I ask them is, is what you're asking, is this a realistic change, first of all?
Right.
Is this something you really feel that they could honestly do?
Right. That's exactly right.
And if it's not, like, are they capable? Is this a reasonable request? And if they're not, then you have a choice. Like you said, you can either accept it or you can make a change about that. But
right.
Yeah, I love that. Sharon, thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom and insights regarding dating and relationships. We could be talking forever, and I know there's so much more that you could share with our listeners, but I know that what you've shared so far is really going to be helpful to everyone listening.
Good. I hope so. I do have some books that I think would be helpful for your readers. I'd like to share if that would be all right.
Definitely. Please share whatever resources you think would be helpful for them.
So one of the books that was really helpful to me when I first started my own personal work was a book by Thomas More called Care of the Soul, and another book by my mentor. It's called Getting to I Do by Dr. Pat Allen. And then a book that I think probably be surprised that I'm offering this one, but it's called Women Who Love Psychopaths by Sandra Brown. I just think it's a good book to learn about men who aren't good, and the women who the characteristics of the women who fall for them. And I think it's an eye opener.
That sounds fascinating.
It is. It is fascinating. And then my website is drsharoncohen.com, and I have a free ebook that you can get calling Turning Mr. Wrong into Mr. Right that I would be happy for your listeners to download.
Definitely, and we will put links to the books that you mentioned along with your website, and so that listeners can find you and also get a hold of that ebook.
That's excellent.
Thank you so much, Sharon, again, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, you too, Lourdes. It's been wonderful.
Take care.
You too.
I hope you enjoyed today's conversation with Dr. Sharon. Some of the things that stood out for me were that one of the ways to view dating is as practice, and instead of feeling that you're wasting your time or that you'll never meet the right one or you keep dating the wrong people, that these are opportunities for you to practice the skills that you will really need when you do meet someone who's the right person. Another piece that stood out for me was that one of the ways to tell that someone is a keeper is whether they make and keep agreements with you. I also found it fascinating how oxytocin can be considered nature's love superglue, and that is why it's so important that women navigate the early days and months of a relationship very carefully, because there's a lot going on biologically that is influencing your decision making. So it's really wise to slow things down and let the gift of time reveal to you what is really happening in this relationship. For show notes to today's episode, please visit www.lourdesfiato.com/women-in-depth, where you will find the links mentioned along with Dr. Sharon's website, where you can go and access a free copy of her ebook. Again, thank you so much for listening, and see you next time.